This is TWiT.
The European Parliament yesterday voted on a new piece of legislation that has online copyright in its sights, and it's been a little controversial, to say the least. The Copyright Directive was approved yesterday in Parliament. Though a final vote will not take place until January 2019, it is expected to pass. Many argue it will significantly change the free flow of ideas on the internet. And joining us to share his take on the Copyright Directive is Danny O'Brien from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Hey, good to be here.
It's great to have you here, so thank you for joining us. So first of all, the EFF has written about this vote saying Europe, quote, lost the internet, which is a very big statement. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, one of the things that the internet has always sort of benefited from is that it's kind of a permissionless environment. If you wanted to set up a website or build a service, you didn't have to go and ask someone permission to do that. And this really majorly changes that kind of setup. So basically, there's lots of things in this regulation, some good, some terrible. But the one we've mainly been talking about is Article 13, which requires services which take uploads from users and then put them online. And it will require those services to effectively filter everything for copyright infringements before they go up, but really only the kind of infringements that a computer algorithm could detect. So that means that most of the actual piracy will go through fine because they can get around those kind of algorithms. But stuff like fair use, stuff like parodies, things like remixes, stuff that has music playing in the background, as I actually have right now, those would be automatically blocked. Unless you go and strike a deal with the license holders. And so that means that if you wanted to run one of these services, you'd have to strike deals. And for everybody else who might serve you a copyright notice, you'll have to block that content.
So the idea is that they will be serving the content creators by doing this. Is there any way in which that is true?
So I'm probably, I'm going to give you our point of view, but our point of view is based on 20 years having this discussion about copyright, where rights holders are very worried about the internet because people copy things on the internet. And our explanation is, well, you can't stop people copying things on the internet. That's what it does. When you cut and paste, that's what happens. And in fact, there are lots of ways in which artists benefit from that. In fact, like the huge explosion in music, in remixes, in YouTube culture, all of that came from technologies that the rights holders tried to ban. So in this situation, what they're sort of doing is their assumption is if they force the tech companies to create these huge walls, then the tech companies will somehow pay them to take the walls down. Of course, it's artists who are on the other side of that wall. It's artists who are trying to get their content online, and it's everybody else on the internet who isn't part of this ongoing battle who ends up suffering.
Now, there were parts of the proposal that the EU rejected flat out.
Right.
What were some of those? How were they representative of this whole story of copyright in kind of the modern digital age?
So what we're trying to do, and actually how this directive started up, was to try and see if we could fix copyright, see if we could take some of the stuff that really wasn't panning out, and put some sort of fixes in place. So a good example of this is, well, okay, if suddenly these algorithms are going to wipe out memes, as the meme went, then maybe we can create a copyright exemption in the same way as we have copyright exemptions for research purposes or educational purposes. So there was one clause that said, okay, user-generated content, like memes, has a particular exemption. That was voted down. Another example of this is that there are some old laws on the books in many countries in Europe that say if you take a photograph of a public statue or you're in a public place, you have to pay a license fee to the architects who made that statue in the first place, which means basically any photograph you take of yourself or a selfie in public that has something in the background, technically you could be sued for infringement. Now, that never really used to matter because people would take photos for themselves. But now, because they're uploading them onto these services, or they're using those pictures on Wikipedia, or just using it to brighten up their blog, all of those people are infringing, could be sued, and would be blocked by these filters. So Wikipedia particularly pressed for a right of panorama, which a lot of countries have, which is an exemption. That was voted down. And the stuff that got voted up is kind of insane. There's like an extra clause that was dropped in the last minute that made the organizers of sports events the blanket owner with no exemptions of any material that came out of that. So now, technically, not only are your selfies in front of public buildings infringing, any photo or anything you take of a sports event in Europe could also be blocked as well. So we've always been arguing, what we need with copyright in the digital era is a bit of a light touch, and Europe has doubled down on copyright isn't working, so we're going to force all of these extra rules until we manage to work out a way of extracting money from it.
You talked a little bit about the algorithms that might be able to recognize copyrighted content and all of it that it wouldn't be able to recognize. Are there any can you talk at all about the technical solutions that they claim will help here?
Well, the irony here is that I think that one of the reasons why this passed in Europe is because Europeans, and particularly EU politicians, are super mad at Google and super mad at Facebook. And someone, understandably, right? They're foreign companies. They now dominate a lot of the communication. They don't pay all the taxes they'd like them to pay. They mess, there's many reasons why they're understandably mad. But this algorithmic solution to this problem is something actually Google's been touting for some time. At the beginning of YouTube, when YouTube was being sued by rights holders, and they were actually basically trying to stop YouTube, in order to moderate that and fend that off, Google introduced this thing called Content ID. Now, you will know it better as the thing that randomly deletes videos off YouTube because there's music playing in the background, or you've accidentally played Bach, and Sony claims all the copyright on Bach performances. It's not a good solution, but it's something that the rights holders felt might work. One of the reasons why it's not a solution is you can kind of do this image audio detection, sort of Shazam style on these things. But it can't recognize fair use, right? If I put up a clip of Donald Trump that's owned by NBC, say, that's going to go down, right? Because it matches the image. If I'm putting up a video of Trump because I want to criticize Trump, or I want to criticize NBC's coverage of Trump, that's perfectly legal in the EU and here. But you can't teach an AI politics. And believe me, at the EFF, if we could, we'd probably have just left it to them.
Can't teach an AI politics yet. There's always.
I mean, I'm not sure we want the politics that an early 0.1 version of AI or that the European governments want. Yeah. The irony is they just introduced another law at the same time as this one that wants to use algorithms to find and remove terrorist encouraging content within an hour.
Yeah, that's right. That was yesterday, news yesterday, right. I believe, right?
Same thing. It's like, we have a problem here. Something must be done. This is something. Let's do it.
Wow. So you mentioned, or rather the post, I think the post was Cory Doctorow, right? Writing for the EFF, which was a very good piece, very worth the read. He points out something that I thought was very poignant. He says, as long as people have problems that intersect with the internet, there will always be calls to break the internet to solve them. And I feel like, now more than ever, we see this time and time again. This is becoming the go-to solution. And, I'm sure you could speak from the EFF left's perspective as far as just how much the things seem to have ramped up around this point. Are you hopeful at this point that this kind of tendency to break things can be overcome, or are we hitting kind of this critical mass point where it just seems to everyone apparently that this is the only way to fix things?
Well, I always have to be optimistic in this situation.
Sure.
We've gone through a long period where the internet was suggested as the solution to all problems, and at the FF we spent a lot of time going, there's these downsides. Surveillance will be a problem. Yeah. Privacy will be a problem, and so now where the pendulum has swung again. My hope is that people start realizing the damage before they pass the laws. Yeah. And one of the good things about this is it's going to take a while to implement. There are a couple more votes to go through, and the way the EU works is that individual member states have to implement this in their own law afterwards. So there's an opportunity for the first countries to realize the consequences of this, and there's possibilities for the courts to realize this and step in. So yeah, I am confident as long as government doesn't run ahead of itself. And I think the problem right now is because everyone's panicking slightly, and because you get brownie points for doing something, as I say, the regulators are running ahead of themselves.
Yeah. Well, Danny O'Brien, it's been a pleasure bringing you on today. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to us about this important issue. Everybody should definitely look up the EFF post that we're talking about in this interview, and just really appreciate your time. Where do you want people to follow you online if they want to follow your independent vote or opinions online?
Oh, me? Yeah. Well, I always recommend people following Corey, who's all over the internet. I'm Mala on Twitter, but I very rarely talk about these things. And I'm also Mala on Mastodon. So mastodon.social. So that's probably where I talk about those things. Right. And you can, of course, follow Twitter, follow EFF on twitter.com/EFF.
Right on. Danny, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good evening.